If you haven't already picked it by now, it's Pentecost today. So I chose to juxtapose the Acts and the Ezekiel reading because both of these readings have at their core a vibrant, miraculous and dynamic account of the work of the Spirit. So to begin with Ezekiel, for anybody who has actually read Ezekiel, you'll know it's a bit of an odd book. It's a bit strange. So I've got some fun facts. Apparently, some strands of Jewish tradition, Ezekiel was not allowed to be studied until the age of 33. I couldn't find out what the significance was of 33, but apparently the reason was it was seen as too mystical. And apparently it was seen as so controversial, it very nearly didn't make the biblical cut. And okay, you might need to be a bit of a theological nerd to enjoy those fun facts, but I thought I'd include them anyway. In the Ezekiel reading, we hear how the Spirit sets Ezekiel down in the middle of a valley, full of very dry bones. This location would have evoked images of a battlefield. Bones of his people desiccated and exposed in the valley. This was as bad and as bleak as it could get. Yet Ezekiel trusts and prophesies as he's commanded to do. And as he does, the breath, the Spirit restores the bones, the life of Israel, from a place of hopelessness and impossibility. And from that place comes new life. As we move into the Pentecost account of Acts 2, it's an account that for people of Christian faith, it marks the birth of the church. It's an account that's associated with God giving the gift of the Holy Spirit. However, I believe that we need to continue to allow the Jewish wisdom and tradition to weave through our understanding. And you know I like a bit of context, so here we go. The Greek Pentecost, it means 50th, and it refers to the Jewish festival of weeks, or Shavuot, which is celebrated still today, 7 weeks after Passover. It's a celebration of the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, and it's an expression of thanks for God's faithfulness in supplying the grain harvest for the summer. And in the biblical tradition, men would take their first fruits to Jerusalem as offerings to God. Now the Spirit. In Ezekiel, the same Hebrew word, huah, is used interchangeably for spirit and breath. And that's because neither on their own fully captures the fullness of the reality of this breath, this Spirit. Acts, the description violent wind, noyes biayos, can be translated also as forcible breath of life. The Spirit that descends upon the disciples is the same Spirit present and active in Ezekiel. She is the same Spirit present and active in creation. She swept over the face of the waters. She's the creative origin of life. She was present at the conception and baptism of Jesus, revealing the truth of his identity and mission. She's the very Spirit that Jesus commended to the hands of God at his crucifixion. And yes, I say she, because the grammatical gender for the Spirit is feminine in the Hebrew. It's moved to neuter in the Greek, and alas, the femininity of the Spirit became marginalised by patriarchal imagination. Anywho, she's the Spirit that restores life to Israel in Ezekiel, and then turns up and rests upon the community of disciples in Acts. We need to recognise and acknowledge that while the Spirit rests upon individuals, she does in the context of community. This account is filled with violent wind and fiery imagery as the disciples are filled with the promised Holy Spirit, who turns up quite unexpectedly and not exactly quietly. She gives each of the community the ability of potent speech in different languages. And all of a sudden, the disciples are outside among a crowd who are bewildered by the sound, amazed and astonished at the disciples' ability to speak in native tongues of many. Now, while languages and fiery imagery appear dramatic to us, this imagery was nothing new to the first century world. Philo, in his treatise on the Decalogue, said, "Then from the midst of the fire that streamed from heaven, there sounded forth to their utter amazement a voice, for the flame became articulate speech in the language familiar to the audience, and so clearly and distinctly were the words formed by it that they seemed to see rather than hear them." For many people in the Christian faith, this act of glossolalia, speaking in tongues, of native languages, we need to remember it was the native languages in Acts, has been understood to reference the 1 Corinthians reading. Yet Paul makes clear in his reading the tongues he was talking about is speaking to God in the Spirit with nobody understanding. And this is obviously not the Pentecost experience of Acts, because not only did people understand what was being said, they were astonished and amazed. Not because they can't understand, but quite the opposite. They understood perfectly. In our readings this morning, we encounter the Spirit who is creative, unceasing. She's the dynamic flow of the divine, of God who transforms and brings forth new life. As I read for today, I did so as the conflict in Israel and Palestine intensified. I read about this dynamic, life-giving Spirit in the shadow of death and in the period of Shavuot. It got me reflecting on how our lives here in Australia and how the reality is we're pretty secure. We've fared well in the pandemic. We've never experienced invasion and occupation. And then I remembered National Sorry Day is on Wednesday. And I remembered that the first people of this nation, our Aboriginal siblings, have endured and lived with invasion and occupation, injustice and violence, inequality and oppression. They have witnessed the visions of the very dry bones laying in the red dirt of this land. And as second peoples, we're more like the imperial powers in the background of Ezekiel text than the exiles that he preached to. As a community of Easter people, we must be willing to acknowledge the mistreatment of the first people. And then we must move that, and we must acknowledge the mistreatment of people seeking asylum and refugees. We must acknowledge racial discrimination, discrimination against our LGBTIQA+ siblings, sexism, and basically the violence that exists in our communities and the world. And I realise this might not be something that you want to hear, that we want to hear, but we must. Because only when we are honest and we open our eyes to the truth can we begin to work for transformation. Only then can we prophesy to the devastation. Only then can we prophesy for the breath of new life to come. Only then can we be open to the Spirit, and open that she will fill us with the ability to speak to and understand for a diversity of people. Pentecost follows the impossible of the resurrection account. This impossibility makes possible the transformation of the disciples, and in turn makes possible the transformation of the world. Pentecost reminds us of the endless energy of the Spirit, of our ability to flow into and through our heart and community and through the world, to restore life from a place of impossibility. She demands that we join her in recognising the sacred in all human beings, breaking down barriers that divide. She demands that we recognise the beauty and the fragility of creation. Discipleship is an ongoing process. We celebrate the gift of the Spirit. She breathes life into each of us. The challenge for each of us is, as she breathes this new life into us, we must be prepared to pour out the message of new life, which is justice, inclusion, and radical love. And put more basically, it's the good news of Jesus, and we're called to pour that out into our communities and the world. Let's pray. Send your Spirit upon us, Holy Love, for we are your people. Prepare us. Fill us with new life, that we may dare to be your love in the world, that we may witness your kingdom. Amen.